What's up, everyone? Buckle up because you're in for a long ride. Next up, we have none other than Celebi. This legendary time-traveling onion fairy guardian of the forest has been around since the second generation, appearing in many things, with its most notable appearance, of course, being starring in the fourth movie, literally titled Pokemon Forever, and holding a pivotal role in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time, Darkness, and Sky series. It was the first follow-up to Mew as the legendary final Pokemon in the Pokédex that could not be caught via regular means, but through some sort of event. In this case, of course, the Elix Forest event, or through the Sneasel glitch, and thus captured fans' hearts through the desire to obtain it and its dainty appearance. But of course, looks can be deceiving, which is why we pose the question today: how good was Celebi actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Celebi is actually uber in its debut generation, although it was not always so. At the outset of the generation, around the turn of the century, it roamed overused. Nearly everything in GSC is decently bulky thanks to the maxed out stats, but thanks to Celebi's 100 across the board, it took this to a real extreme. The only non-explosive move that can one-hit KO it is Heracross's Mega Horn, as it survives even insanely strong attacks like Charcoal Moltres' Fire Blast, and even Machamp's curse-boosted Hidden Power Bug, which only KOs around a third of the time. This is discounting Celebi's access to Reflect and Stab Psychic, which also dissuades Heracross. As such, Celebi was a major player on the nearly unbreakable stall teams it fit on perfectly, due to its tremendous blend of threat coverage and overall utility, which included the incredible moves such as Perish Song and Heal Bell. With 32 PP on its recover, as well as Leech Seed, it was an unbreakable stalling machine, and this was made even worse by its great speed. Now, of course, it wasn't banned for being offensively overwhelming, since despite its good special attack and decent stabs, it won't be sweeping teams or even dishing out that much damage anytime soon. It was actually banned for being utterly unkillable. Every time there's a GSC with Celebi tournament, it becomes an utter stall fest, because the only way to reliably kill Celebi is to wait it out, and even that takes some time. The strongest pursuit available, which is Black Glass's Houndoom, barely scratches it, and that's super niche. Thus, Celebi resides in Ubers, where it supports Lugia, Ho-Oh, Mewtwo, and Mew. It doesn't really counter the other Ubers though, but instead, its job is to take on the Exploders, such as Snorlax and Steelix that attempt to take the Ubers on, and thus Celebi helps the other Ubers on its own team out. They also particularly detest status, and Celebi of course helps with that. While in an emergency, Perish Song can stop a rampaging Swords Dance Mew or Cursed Lugia. Celebi even survives a boosted Aeroblast. It must watch out for Fortress, who is the bane of Celebi's existence thanks to its resistance to its stabs, spikes, and rapid spin for opposing spikes, and Celebi's Leech Seed, and even Stab Hidden Power Bug, but that is manageable with team support and solid play. But other than that, Celebi is still tremendously hard to reliably kill, and thus does its job incredibly effectively. Now, the third generation was a doozy for Celebi. For most of the generation, it was considered one of the best Pokemon, up there with Tyranitar, Suicune, Skarmory, and Gengar. And not only were its stats great, it suddenly had its issue from the previous generation fixed. It gained the move pool that gifted it unparalleled versatility. Calm Mind, Baton Pass, hidden powers that didn't shred into its bulk, Swords Dance, and this is in addition to its old tricks remaining terrific. In fact, Leech Seed became a lot more powerful, so it truly shone, especially with its new ability Natural Cure, which let it shrug off status without having to burn a Heal Bell, which was incredibly useful with all the Toxic and Will-O-Wisps flying around. It could take on an insane amount of roles. Its most iconic one was a GSC-esque defensive variant, using a bold nature with lots of physical defense EVs. This assisted with physical monsters such as Metagross and Cursed Snorlax, and it didn't need investment in special defense since it naturally handled bulky Suicune, Swampert, and Zapdos so well. In advance, it's more difficult to sit back without retaliating and have it be effective, so Celebi went on the offensive of sorts via the use of the buffed Leech Seed to spread better residual damage alongside permanent sand and layered spikes. Now, this made it harder to stall out since more damage was being forced with every use, and this could be taken advantage of in many ways. This set also used old tricks such as Heal Bell, Perish Song, and Reflect, but now also used Psychic to help with dangerous Pokemon such as Gengar, Salamence, and Heracross, or Hidden Power Grass, so it could take a Hidden Power Bug from Choice Band Duck Dugtrio and kill it back. Speaking of hidden power bug, it's a testament to Celebi's effect on the metagame that this move is slapped on so many Pokemon, such as the aforementioned Dugtrio, but also notably Dragon Dance Tyranitar and Flygon, as well as some variants of Metagross, Curselax, and Choice Band Aerodactyl. It's also another reason Heracross is so threatening against defensive teams. Celebi is a big fat target for its Mega Horn to spear. Of course, Celebi doesn't need to be purely supportive though. Sometimes it augments its Leech Seed with Calm Mind, giving its Psychics more muscle against Curselax, Suicune, Roar Zapdos, and even Skarmory. This makes it not only one of the toughest Pokemon to kill in the metagame, but also a dangerous sweeper. It can also spring a massive surprise and drop Leech Seed for Baton Pass, thus making its teammates incredibly scary. This can be seen on dedicated Baton Pass teams as part of the chain, but functions just as effectively on regular teams as well. Celebi even found itself on physical offense teams thanks to its ability to bait in Skarmory, which would let it Baton Pass right into Magneton for the kill. And afterwards, it switched into threatening bulky waters and sword stances up before Baton Passing these incredibly threatening boosts to the sweepers. These were the sets Celebi mostly used in the 2000s. It was even banned for a time for being insanely versatile and incredibly good in every role it assumed, although this didn't last. It was widely considered in the top 3 of advanced Pokemon by most experienced players, and few even claimed a team without Celebi wasn't a good team. While going this far was quite rare and a likely exaggerated opinion, it spoke to just how good Celebi was. In the 2010s though, a new more offensive variant popped up. In a Jirachi-esque vein, Celebi maxed out its speed and special attack and ran with a set of Calm Mind, Psychic, Giga Drain, and Hidden Power Fire. While the lack of bulk could sting at times, notably against Dugtrio, Snorlax, and Metagross, the improved coverage, speed, and power was an entirely new set of weapons for Celebi that made life difficult for traditional answers such as Skarmory, Salamence, Tyranitar, Metagross, and Heracross. It was tremendous on Calm Mind or special offense teams that wanted to overwhelm the opponent from the special side while having a backbone against water, electric, and status. This happened at the same time and very often on the same team as the new offensive Suicune, who would blow up unprepared counters to its defensive set on opposing teams, namely the slower bulky variants of Celebi and Zapdos, especially if the Suicune was packing substitute for Celebi's attempted Leech Seed. Speed on these new offensive Celebi sets would help counteract this, and although a drawn-out Calm Mind battle wasn't always advisable, thanks to the potential of Roar on the Suicune, it was a good weapon to have. However, defensive Celebi teams lacking Blissey would need to reconsider their approach. Eventually, especially offensive Celebi even began dropping Psychic for Baton Pass. This offensive Baton Pass option would let it fake out Blissey, who thought the Celebi was an all-out set and easily handle 1v1, and also this set was difficult to phase versus Skarmory, letting it get passes off safely against common defensive cores and teams. It could also safely get Dugtrio in off a switch to take out things like Blissey or Tyranitar. Celebi's newly added weaponry helped push the metagame in a much more offensive direction than the Stolier era of before and made it more versatile than ever. However, the defensive sets weren't quite done. With the growing power of Gengar, Starmie, Mixed Salamence, and Zapdos getting more offensive, as well as the new popularity of Jolteon, especially defensive variants of Celebi using the same movesets as the classic Bold variants started popping up and were insanely difficult to break. They could even throw a wrench in faster Suicune's plans due to Leech Seed and sheer bulk. While now that it's specially defensive, making it more vulnerable to Dugtrio, it could still tank it without much issue and kill it back. It just required a little more care to stay at high health. And now the final comparatively new variant of Celebi is the Substitute, Leech Seed, Recover, and Baton Pass set. Due to its lack of real offense, it isn't going to plow through teams itself anyway. So instead, it exists to soak up hits for its teammates using Leech Seed as its only needed weapon while passing very bulky 101 HP substitutes to its teammates. It specializes in enabling trap teams as many common switch-ins are vulnerable to Magneton and or Dugtrio, and provides defensive utility while easing their switch-ins, and in doing so greatly further supports the other 3 Pokemon on the team, such as Cursed Snorlax. These days though, Celebi's not as dominant or widely used as it was before, as its defensive sets need lots of support to not be overwhelmed by the combination of Spikes and Sandstorm, in addition to threats like Aerodactyl, Mixed Salamence, and Starmie, and of course its offensive variants lack bulk. However, it's still one of the best Pokemon around, no matter what role it assumes, and will reward any good player using it. It is possibly the most versatile Pokemon in the tier, rivaled only by Tyranitar, who can only dream of pulling some of Celebi's tricks. And in conclusion, Celebi is one of the most powerful, important, defining Pokemon in Advance. Now on to Diamond and Pearl. For the vast majority of the 4th generation, Celebi stood in the way of physical attackers such as Gyarados, Breloom, Lucario, Metagross, Kingdra, and Machamp with a 3rd gen-esque bold set. It gained Grass Knot as a grass stab, which helped it ward off the newly specially defense-boosted Tyranitar, as well as defensive Suicune, and used Hidden Power Fire religiously once Scizor came around in Platinum with its threatening U-turns. Speaking of U-turn, while it couldn't exactly take banded stab U-turns, it was so bulky that it could easily recover off Choice Scarf, Flygon, and Jirachi using it, despite the quadruple weakness. Early on, it used Perish Song on stall teams and paired it with U-turn to see what the opponent would switch to escape the song. And in general, it was more seen on balanced teams and often used Leech Seed, but it could also just as easily switch it out for its newly gained Thunder Wave. After it switched it on a water type such as Swampert or Vaporeon, it could safely throw one out and cripple dangerous Pokemon such as Latias, Salamence, Gengar, Infernape, Heatran, and Tyranitar. An offensive variant of this set named Tinkerbell also existed. It kept max HP, so it was still quite bulky, but traded its bold nature and defense EVs for modest and special attack. In addition, it used 2 new damage-dealing moves, such as Life Orb and Leaf Storm, to pose a greater offensive threat that Gliscor and Flygon could not switch somewhat safely in on, thus allowing it to safely use Thunder Wave. Now, Celebi was never one of the most dominant Pokemon in the metagame, but when Generation 4 was just OU, it was one of the best and consistently most used, and had to be accounted for when making a team, or you ran the risk of being stonewalled. While these bulkier variants of Celebi were the standard, a lead Celebi variant existed. With Octoberry and Earth Power, it could deal with Heatran leads and was a solid Stealth Rock setter. In fact, it started games off well, while keeping one's big guns in good health, thanks to Celebi's ability to go one-on-one with most Pokemon as a result of its great natural bulk. It was a rarer set, but it was a nice option for offense. To continue in the offensive vein, at the end of the generation, Celebi received Nasty Plot in an event, and while this set has potential against defensive teams, its potential coverage issues and exploitable revenge-killing weaknesses meant it would often fail at cleanly sweeping teams. Some players made attempts to baton pass with it, with the most notable recipients being the terrifying Agility Empoleon or Zapdos, and while this wasn't the most consistent common strategy, it definitely has its place in the metagame. After the generation ceased to be standard overused, more variants were explored in the wake of the Latias and Salamence bans. Especially defensive Calm Mind sets were very difficult for many specially focused offensive teams, featuring Pokemon such as Heatran, Gengar, Shaymin, and Suicune to break. U-turn variants alongside Dugtrio made quick work of Blissey and non-Choice Scarf Heatran, and this combo saw use on some of the most notable offensive teams, but was also useful on some stalls. Though it turns out the offensive variants saw the most landing success, as they could set up Stealth Rock, they could check waters such as offensive Suicune with their higher speed and powerful Leaf Storms, they could use U-turn to keep momentum, not necessarily relying on the Trapper, they could spread paralysis with Thunder Wave, and they could be pretty difficult to switch into safely for some teams. With the growing popularity of Zapdos and Breloom, it was a pretty decent time to use one of their best collective checks that could pose a threat and contribute to the offensive and defensive synergy of a team. Now, it's not as popular as when Generation 4 was the main generation of the time, because the metagame has shifted to a state where Celebi's talents are not as obvious to some, and it isn't as easy to use. However, Celebi will reward the diligent trainer who digs beneath the surface, and it's still a very solid Pokemon in DPP. Now on to the weather generation. Celebi's usage dimmed at the beginning of the generation in the wake of the mighty Ferrothorn, and was even underused for a time, but it quickly reappeared and moved back up to overused once people realized that a grass type with Natural Cure, Nasty Plot, Recover, and the buffed Giga Drain were tremendous weapons against the new, incredibly dangerous Rain Stall team style, with Hidden Power Fire disposing of the new spiky Durian. Scald coming from waters like Politoed and Tentacruel were dangerous, and waters being able to burn was also commonplace now, with the Will-O-Wisping Jellicent and the new water-type Rotom Wash, so having a Natural Cure grass type as a weapon was invaluable. Its solid bulk also helped stave off rain-boosted offensive moves, and if it eschewed Recover for Earth Power, common Sandstall teams packing Heatran were in trouble as well. Now eventually it moved into a more specially defensive role, reassuming its old Perish Song U-turn set to counter the dangerous new Calm Mind Reuniclus, while still absorbing status and help checking rain, and as a result, it became a fixture on many stall teams. It retained this role throughout most of Black and White 2, countering the new Keldeo and Sheer Force Landers. In fact, it became so common that Keldeo began to run Hidden Power Bug for it, and regular Landers started using U-turn before it was banned. It also was realized that Celebi didn't particularly need moves besides Recover and Baton Pass, since it mostly existed to sponge rain and status, so some players turned it into a threat by running Nasty Plot on it, turning Pokemon like Choice Specs Tornadus, Choice Scarf Keldeo, and Agility Thunderous Therian into complete nukes. Reuniclus had died out, out, so Perish Song wasn't really important, and thus Baton Pass became preferable to U-Turn, since it escaped pursuit from Choice Band Tyranitar, who's a common Keldeo and Landorus partner. Celebi's Nasty Plot set also enjoyed a resurgence, this time with Hidden Power Ice to lure Garchomp and Landorus Therian. Eventually, players began to overwhelm Celebi with more U-turns and aggressive play, in conjunction with the powerful spikes and threats such as Hydreigon and Alakazam, and its usage died out. However, it had its place throughout the annals of 5th generation overuse history, and who knows, it may pop up again to deal with popular sand balance teams. Celebi assumed its old specially defensive role in Oraz, with the power of the ever-present Scald-spamming Specs Keldeo giving it a niche. However, it failed to accomplish anything of note on offense and let in a ton of incredibly dangerous Pokemon for free, which comprised of mostly various Megas, but Talonflame and Bisharp were notable as well, and thus Celebi eventually dropped to underuse. There, it was more comfortable with the power level and surroundings and got up to its old tricks. It had plenty of waters to shut down, it could Nasty Plot against Stall, set Stealth Rock against most things, and occasionally spread the yellow magic with Thunder Wave, which is fundamentally solid since ground types don't like dealing with grass types. Now of course it has flaws, its U-turn weakness was more noticeable than ever, and it was quite weak to staples such as Mega Aerodactyl, Mega Beedrill, Mega Absol, Mega Houndoom, Infernape, Hydreigon, and Mienshao. However, it's not like these Pokemon lacked risks when switching in, and Celebi was solid against a high number of other Pokemon, and packed longevity, power, and versatility, so it was always a useful choice in this metagame. Now finally, we get to Gen 7. Overused was finally completely out of Celebi's reach, but the introduction of Z-moves gave Celebi the power boost it'd been longing for a while, since the base stat of 100 was no longer a particularly impressive attacking stat. This let it really cartwheel its way through stall teams, and with Leaf Storm's upgrade into Bloom Doom being particularly fearsome, and Shattered Psyche being nothing to sneeze at either, especially after a Nasty Plot boost, but no longer needing one for immediate power against offensive teams packing Pokemon such as Nihilego, which are too fast for the plot to have any use against anyways. The Sun and Moon underused metagame is rather similar to the Oraz one, so many of Celebi's strengths and weaknesses remain the same. A particularly new foe is a Alolan Muck, but a Nasty Plot boosted Earthquake jacked up into Tectonic Rage will dispose of it, and there are new victims such as Komodo for it to prey on. Overall, Celebi is not a standout, but it's a fine Pokemon in the tier, and creative players have even explored fringe options that are actually quite effective, such as Choice Scarf, and there's no better feeling than surprising an Infernape that thought it had an easy KO. And before we end, you might be wondering where the hell is VGC? Well, yeah, since Celebi's a mythical and an event Pokemon, it's just banned. So yeah. And that's it. So how good was Celebi actually? It was definitely up there as one of the best Pokemon throughout history, even going so far as to hold an uber position in 2 different generations, even if one was only temporary. And while power creep and more aggressive tactics caught up with its more defensive approaches in nearly every gen, it's managed to adapt and remain a solid Pokemon in whatever metagame it finds itself in, even if it's not as easy to plug in and go as some other Pokemon and requires some more thought from its trainer. And of course, as I said earlier, it wasn't allowed in VGC, but I'd still think it'd be pretty interesting if Nintendo or whoever runs that allows Pokemon like Celebi, Mew, and Shaman and whatever to be played. Overall, Celebi was a great Pokemon. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course, as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.